Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Adult Sunday School lesson for June the 29th, 2025. It's a most interesting text we have to look at from the Old Testament book of Second Kings. It's entitled Taken Up and Left Behind. This is the concluding lesson in a series that has been entitled When We Need Hope. So all of these lessons have pictured believers who were seeking consolation, help, blessing from God at low points in their life or when they were grieving. It's almost a universal phenomenon that all people, whether they're religious or not, want signs of God's presence in their lives. And we looked at the first lesson in confusion and conflict. When we're confused, certainly we like to be shown the right way out of our confusion. Confusion and conflict would be synonymous feelings, I suppose. Joy and pain, however, are antithetical or opposites. Many times when we're in pain, we're seeking consolation from God. When we're experiencing happiness or joy, sometimes we just rely on ourselves and don't spend much effort seeking to connect with God. Mourning and praising, these are other opposite feelings. When we are mourning and hurting or grieving, of course we seek God's blessing and help. When we're praising, we're seeking to be with God, but it's in a different context. And today, the last lesson is taken up and left behind. And so I think the image of this lesson is that when someone we're fond of or a loved one or a friend is no longer around, doesn't have to be through death, it could be a job transfer or a relocation, and we're left behind, we sometimes grieve and wonder how best to react to that. So that's our point of departure today. People seek not just a cosmic or mechanistic God, but long for a personal God who cares about what they are experiencing. So this unit has helped us explore God's presence, found mainly in the Hebrew Scriptures, as we are experiencing these various feelings: confusion, conflict, joy, pain, mourning, praise, and seeing someone taken up, leaving us, and we being left behind. This comes from the book of Second Kings. Say a little bit about background information about this book. In it, we read how God allows invaders to wipe both Jewish nations, Israel and Judah, the northern tribes and the southern tribe, off the world map, leveling their cities and exiling the survivors. It's a sad story, but it's punishment long overdue for centuries of sin, especially for worshiping idols. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the books of First Kings and Second Kings are a single book of the Kings, but in the Christian Scriptures they're divided. These are rather long narratives, and it's much easier, more manageable to look at the books in isolation. First Kings starts with the earlier kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. Second Kings have a bit of Solomon, but these are the kings that emerged in the north, in the south, when the kingdom split. The book of Second Kings covers approximately 300 years of history, starting with the prophet Elijah and ending with the fall of Jerusalem in 586 before the Common Era. So these are near historical accounts. There are existing archaeological digs that we can identify some of the events that are described in this book. And we have actually archaeological remains for the kings that go back as far as Solomon or perhaps David. So these books are within the realm of archaeological history. Sometimes these books of Kings are called the former prophets by Jewish believers because they divide the scriptures between the law, the first 5 books, the prophets, and the writings. The writings would be Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, books like that. All the other books that have a historical basis, they call them prophets. And in fact, if you read 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you'll see that it relives the history of the kings in 3 separate accounts. That means that the account given in 1st and 2nd Kings will be slightly different than the account given in 1st and 2nd Samuel or in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. That's the writers of these books wanted to emphasize differing truths or differing prophecy or different aspects of the historical situation that the nation was going through. So these stories are told from a slightly different point of view and with a slightly different conclusion. As I mentioned, the Hebrew scriptures are divided into the law, the prophets, and the writings. Thus, the book of Kings are thought of as prophetic books by Israel. Here we have a picture of Elijah, who is the person that's going to be taken up. He performs a miraculous deed in parting the Jordan River. He takes off his mantle or cloak and folds it up and slaps it against the water, and the water is divided. This brings to mind, of course, Moses parting the Red Sea with his staff. So there are many parallels between Elijah and Moses. And the writer of Kings points out that Elijah was quite a powerful figure in the history of the nation. And in fact, there is an ongoing significance to Elijah because he was taken up by a whirlwind directly into heaven. It's pictured that he did not face death. In a similar way, Moses did not face death, or Enoch did not face death. These are personages who supposedly have an ongoing, almost human existence in the heavenly realm. And in fact, our Jewish friends, when they practice the Jewish Seder feast, leave a place at the table for Elijah in case he returns. And of course, as we read the New Testament Gospels, we see that on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus somehow had a mystical experience of Elijah and Moses. So these figures have a continuing significance for Christian believers. As far as our lesson introduction, the key question for today is, how is God active when we are in need? Does God shut down and have nothing to do with us? Sometimes we feel that way, but that's largely because of a defect in our understanding or a defect in our willingness to be touched by or to connect with the Lord. The narrative includes the miraculous flight to heaven, called taken up into the whirlwind by Elijah, and the grief experienced by the person who stayed here or who was left behind. That would be his successor, Elisha. So that's the title of our lesson. Taken up, Elijah, and left behind, Elisha. One is taken up to heaven, that is Elijah, and one is left here on earth, Elisha. we'll see that even knowing that Elijah is safe with God does not soothe Elisha's heartbreak at losing his friend and mentor. And that same dynamic we experience in our own spiritual lives when those we are fond of or love pass on and leave us. We are heartbroken. When people get a new job and relocate geographically from us, or if we were to have a falling out with someone and have separation, that causes hurt in our life that we need to trust to God's care. So that's the setup for the lesson. Let's read what it says here in 2 Kings 2, 1 and 2, and then down to verse 6. Again, I encourage you to turn on the closed caption feature of YouTube so that you can see the words as I pronounce them. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. So the prophet Elijah and his apprentice Elisha are traveling together from this place called Gilgal. Elijah is remembered as a mighty fighter against the prophets of Baal during the reign of evil King Ahab and his evil wife Jezebel. In this time, prophets served as channels of communication between humanity and God. And Elijah accepted that mantle and he served that role very well. There were many other kings. The extended text at least, mentions 50 other prophets or prophets in waiting or those who were studying to become prophets were also accompanying Elijah and Elisha in this walk. But there's a disagreement between Elijah and Elisha. Elijah is urging Elisha to stay there, stay put, not to follow him further, because Elijah knows that his time on earth is limited. But we see Elisha with this famous refrain said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live." And he repeated that twice. "I will not leave you. I'm going to hang with you." So that's the setup. Let's continue the narrative here in verses 7 through 10. It says, 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. So get the picture there. Elijah and Elisha are there by the Jordan River, and these 50 prophets in training are back a few yards watching what's happening. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. And the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, You've asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not. So a large group of apprentice prophets are traveling behind Elijah and Elisha. Everyone stops beside the shore of the Jordan River as Elijah rolls up his mantle, strikes the water, and the river is parted. This reminds the onlookers and us of Moses parting the Red Sea by putting out his staff. So the writer of 2 Kings wants us to compare favorably Elijah with Moses. They were both wonder workers, able to part the water. And in their final conversation, Elijah asks Elisha what he can do for him before he ascends the whirlwind into heaven. It's a nice gesture. How can I help you? Is there anything I can do that would make this parting any easier for you? This picture I like. It shows Elijah and Elisha walking on the dry land amid the Jordan River. It was quite a spectacle. You can see in the background at a distance those 50 other prophets who were witnessing this miraculous parting of the water by Elijah and the two prophets passing by on dry land. Elisha, for his part, asks to inherit a double share of Elijah's spirit. That's significant, a double share. He's not asking for any possessions of Elijah, anything that Elijah might own, but is asking instead that he might have that same conquering spirit or ability to be a champion for Yahweh and to have that in double measure, a double portion. So, we read about this, that a double share of an inheritance typically goes to the firstborn son. The others get their own share. So by Elisha asking for a double share, that means he wants to be considered Elijah's firstborn son or true successor to his role as prophet of Yahweh, which seems to be an unselfish request. He just wants to carry on in the same fashion that he has seen Elijah perform. Elijah says, well, this is really a hard thing to do. I don't have power to bestow that myself, but we'll leave this decision request with God. And if you see me drawn up into heaven in the whirlwind, then that means God has bestowed upon you this double portion of my spirit that you seek. The Baptist commentator on this text says, the problem of succession to a prophet so prominent as Elijah in the era prior to the classical prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah was of concern to many. That is, how do you become a prophet? There's no school you could sign up for, no recognized way to become a prophet. Sometimes God spoke directly to the prophet, and people had to take the word of the prophet that God had called him or her to serve in that role. We can see Elisha has been an understudy of Elijah, and so he has learned at the master's hand how to fulfill the role of intermediary between the people and God. So he has some claim to be a successor to Elijah that others may not have. This imagery of a whirlwind or a cyclone or some type of a crazy wind pattern is often associated with the coming of Yahweh. It's mentioned many times in Scripture, in Ezekiel, Isaiah, Zechariah, Psalms, Job, and Jeremiah. So when we see a whirlwind, that can be code for God is passing by and God is present. And so God is coming down to take up Elijah in this whirlwind. It's a one way humans have sought to describe really what is indescribable as miraculous manifestation of God stepping uh, out of the heavenly realm into human experience in ways which are a mystery and we don't understand or control. But the crossing of the Jordan River by Elijah and the crossing of the Red Sea by Moses are close parallels, according to the Baptist commentator. But it's only one of many parallels between Moses and Elijah, perhaps the most famous of which is that on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus, when he goes up and is transfigured, he encounters both Moses and Elijah. Moses signifying the law of Israel and Elijah the prophets of Israel. So Jesus is taking his rightful place as heir to the law and prophets of Israel. Quite a powerful image that we are seeking. But you can see in this image, the whirlwind comes and a chariot takes up Elijah to be with God, yet the mantle of the cloak of Elijah is left over. And you can see in this image how Elijah passes that on to Elisha. A symbolic rendering of his power is now passed on to one who remains here on earth, while Elijah himself is transfixed or taken up to heaven. So, then the concluding portion of Scripture, verses 11 through 14, say, as they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. That is, Elisha, in his sorrow, rends his own garments. Then he, Elisha, picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water. He said, Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Where is he? He struck the water again, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other. And Elisha crossed over. So while they were talking and walking, Elijah is taken up to heaven in this whirlwind, leaving Elisha behind. This grieving Elisha rends his clothing, tears them asunder. Yet he's able to take up the mantle or garment left by Elijah. And then Elisha performs the same miraculous parting of the water, similar to what Moses did, similar to what Elijah did. And now Elisha has that same power. So this is a powerful demonstration that Elisha's faithfulness has been rewarded by God as he witnesses Elijah's departure. And it's a testimony that Elisha is to take up Elijah's work. Elisha confirmed his role as prophet in Israel and successor to Elijah by taking the cloak and performing the same miraculous parting of the waters. So what issues can we see in this today? Well, often when we are overcome by painful emotions of loss, separation, or grief, we may wonder, where is the Lord? Just as was expressed by Elisha. The separation that we feel need not be to death only, but a job move, a relocation, or a personal falling out can cause us to hurt and wonder whether we have abandoned the Lord or the Lord has abandoned us. Another way to say that is sometimes in our foolish pride, we forget that God sees the upper and we the underside of our struggles. This is a very powerful, soothing image for many. Today's lesson affirms God is still active even if we are unaware of it. It could be that our circuits for connection with God have been overloaded by our emotions, and we just are unable to experience God's love in a direct way, which we may be able to as we take corrective actions and seek out the Lord. Here's an image of someone that I think is a very important role model for Christians. Her name is Corrie ten Boom. The Billy Graham Crusade featured her many times. It's where I first learned of her. She is now dead, but she was very active during the World War II years in hiding, the hiding place. She hid many who were doomed by the Nazis to concentration camps, and she provided safety and salvation for many. And she has written a poem that has served as helpful, very helpful for me in times when I struggle. I've shared this poem in Sunday school classes many times, and at the end of this series of lessons, when it talks about where is God when we may feel hurt or grieved, I think it's appropriate, so I'm going to share it. It's quite brief. It says, "My life is but a weaving between my God and me. I do not choose the colors. He worketh steadily. Oft times he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttle cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and explain the reason why the dark threads are as needful in the skillful weaver's hand as the gold and silver colors in the picture he has planned." There's a third verse to this that's sometimes included that goes, "He knows, he cares, he loves, nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice to him." So says Corrie ten Boom. So thank you for joining me today. Again, please don't take me too seriously. I seek to weave these lessons around the outline that our study guide writer provides. Sometimes it's an easier job than others. I think I see where he was going today, talking about being left behind and being taken away. Again, my disclaimer is that these lessons claim no commercial value or intent. They are to be seen only as educational, entertainment, or exhortation. I'm making fair use of some copyrighted material through brief citations for the purpose of education only. So I hope you remember your own prayer concerns and the prayer concerns of our church. And I'll see you next week as we begin another month and another unit of study. I can't thank Daryl Elster enough for all he does, his faithfulness week by week in producing, directing, troubleshooting, and placing these lessons on YouTube. Thank you, Daryl. Until next week, I'll say goodbye.